she told him. Don't fall in love. Her voice steady, though her heart trembled, but her eyes pleaded for everything her lips forbade. Can a cowboy's quiet devotion break through the walls she swore to keep? The evening sun stretched long across the valley, tinting the fields in shades of copper and gold. The wind carried the faint hum of crickets, and the smell of rain that never came. Eli Carson leaned against the fence post, hat low, eyes fixed on the dirt road that wound toward the horizon. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not anymore. Then he saw her. A rider in a pale blue dress, dust on her hem, hair pinned up like she'd run from someplace she didn't plan on returning to. Her horse stopped a few feet from him, nostrils flaring. She dismounted slowly, like every step hurt. You the owner? She asked. Her voice had steel in it but trembled at the edges. Eli nodded once. Depends who's asking. She looked at him, then really looked, and he felt that quiet jolt a man gets when he realizes his day just changed. Name's June, she said finally. June Hale. I'm just looking for work. Won't be trouble, I swear. He didn't answer right away. There was something guarded in her eyes, something that said, don't ask where I came from. Eli knew that look. He'd worn it once himself. You can help with the horses, he said simply. Barn's that way. June's shoulders dropped, with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Thank you. He followed her inside, the smell of hay thick and sweet in the air. She moved like someone who used to belong to a gentler life, but had learned to fight through the rough parts. You married? She asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Eli's jaw tightened. Was. She nodded, almost to herself. Then you know how to keep things from getting messy. That caught him off guard. Messy? She met his eyes again, and this time there was no steel, only fear. I mean feelings. Best we don't let any get in the way. He said nothing, but her words stuck to him like dust after rain. When she turned away, her eyes lingered a moment too long, saying everything her mouth refused to. Outside, the last of the light fell over the hills. Eli watched her walk toward the barn door, and for the first time in years, something inside him stirred a warning, or maybe a promise. If you think a cowboy can ignore a heart that's already speaking louder than words, wait till you see what she does next. Morning came quietly on the Carson ranch. Dew clung to the grass, and a pale mist curled over the fence line. Eli was already awake, his boots crunching against the gravel path as he made his way to the barn. The horses were restless, shifting in their stalls, their breath fogging in the cool air. When he opened the door, June was already there. She'd beaten the sunrise. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, hair tied back, soft humming threading through the morning stillness. The tune was unfamiliar, sad, slow, and tender. For a moment, Eli didn't move. He just listened. It had been a long time since there was music in that barn. June noticed him and straightened quickly. Didn't hear you come in, she said, voice tight with embarrassment. Old habit. Helps the horses stay calm. They seem to like it, he said simply, stepping forward. Her eyes softened a little. Guess they do. Eli watched her move between the stalls, her hands gentle as she brushed down a young mare. There was something practiced in her care, something that spoke of patience, even if her heart looked bruised. He wanted to ask where she'd learned that song, but she kept her gaze fixed on her work, making it clear she wasn't ready for questions. After a while, June broke the silence herself. You always work this ranch alone? Mostly. No family? He paused, leaning on the stall gate. I used to have one. June's hand stilled on the mare's mane. I see. Neither of them said anything else. Words in the barn felt too loud, too sharp. By noon, the sun had burned away the mist. They worked side by side, mending a fence by the creek. The rhythm of hammering posts and tightening wire filled the space between them. Every now and then, June would glance his way, her expression unreadable. You don't talk much, do you? She asked finally. Eli looked up from the post. Not unless there's something worth saying. A faint smile tugged at her mouth. Then maybe that's why the world's quiet around you. Folks like you keep the noise out. She said it lightly, but there was a weight behind her words, something she wasn't ready to admit. When they finished, the wind picked up, brushing through the tall grass. June looked toward the horizon, like she could see something chasing her out there. Eli followed her gaze, saw nothing but open land. "Whatever you're running from," he said softly, "it can't find you here." She turned to him, startled. "Who said I was running?" He didn't answer, just tipped his hat and started back toward the barn. June watched him go, her chest tight. He didn't know her story, but somehow he'd already seen through her walls. And that scared her more than whatever she'd left behind. By the third morning, June had already slipped into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before the sun, boots dusty, hair in loose braids, hands raw from rope burns, and work she hadn't done in years. She didn't complain. If anything, she seemed to need the exhaustion to lose herself in it. Eli noticed. From the porch, he watched her haul water, feed chickens, and brush down the horses without being told. She worked like someone afraid of stopping, as if stillness might bring back whatever she was trying to forget. When she finally looked up and caught him watching, she gave a faint, uncertain smile. He nodded once, then turned away, heart beating a little faster than he wanted to admit. By mid-afternoon, clouds were gathering over the valley. June stood by the corral, studying the horizon. "Rain's comin'," she murmured. Eli joined her, the air between them charged with more than the weather. "You can smell it before it hits," he said. She glanced at him. "You talk like someone who listens to the land." He shrugged. "It's quieter than people." June smiled at that soft, genuine, "Guess I like quiet too." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and wild sage. A low rumble echoed in the distance, and a few drops began to patter on the fence rails. They hurried to the barn, laughing as the downpour came suddenly, hard and cold. Inside, the storm roared against the roof, thunder shaking the rafters. June wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "Cold?" Eli asked. "Just not used to storms," she admitted, her voice nearly lost beneath the rain. "Used to sleep through 'em when I was little. Someone always sang to me." She stopped, blinking hard. "Can't remember who, though." Eli handed her a blanket, the kind that smelled of hay and old memories. "Maybe it'll come back when it needs to." For a moment, their eyes met and stayed there. The air between them felt fragile, electric. June looked away first, clutching the blanket tight. "I said I wouldn't make things messy," she whispered. "Didn't think it'd be this hard to keep that promise." Eli didn't answer. Words felt dangerous now. Instead, he moved to check the horses, but his thoughts stayed tangled in her voice, the way it trembled, the way it reached something in him that had been silent too long. By the time the rain eased, night had fallen. June lit the lantern, the glow turning her hair to copper. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not asking too much." He looked at her from across the barn, shadows moving between them. "Some things don't need asking, they just show themselves." Outside, the storm moved west, leaving the air washed clean. Inside, something unspoken had already begun. The morning after the storm, the ranch seemed reborn. The air smelled of wet earth, the sky washed clear, and the fields shimmered with the soft gleam of new light. June stood by the porch rail, coffee in hand, listening to the sound of dripping eaves. For a moment, she could almost pretend this place belonged to her. Eli stepped out beside her, quiet as always. His hat shadowed his eyes, but there was something easier in his shoulders today, like the storm had loosened more than just the soil. "Sleep all right?" he asked. "Better than I expected," June said. "Storm didn't get through those walls." "Storms don't stay long here," he replied. "They just remind you you're still alive." She smiled faintly. "You talk like a preacher sometimes." He didn't answer, just nodded toward the barn. "Come on, horses need their feed." They worked side by side again, falling into their familiar, wordless rhythm. June hummed softly while sweeping the floor, that same haunting melody she'd sung before. Eli froze mid-step. That song. It hit him like a blow, notes he hadn't heard in years. Not since his wife, Lila, used to sing them while hanging laundry by the back fence. The same rise and fall, the same ache in the sound. He turned slowly. "Where'd you learn that?" June blinked, startled by his tone. I don't know. It just comes out sometimes." Eli's throat tightened. "Someone teach it to you?" "Maybe," she said quietly. "I remember hearing it when I was little, before everything went wrong." He stepped closer, voice low. "Those words, do you remember any of them?" She frowned, trying to recall. Then, barely above a whisper, she sang the line, "The sun may fade, but hearts remember." Eli's chest felt like it had been struck clean open. That was Lila's song, one she'd written herself but never shared beyond him. He turned away abruptly, hands trembling. June stared, confusion flooding her face. "Did I do something wrong?" He shook his head, but the motion was sharp, strained. "No, just keep feeding the horses." She hesitated, then obeyed. The air between them had changed, thick and strange. When she finished, she found him outside by the fence, staring toward the hills, jaw tight. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said gently. "You didn't." His voice cracked on the word. June stepped closer, careful. Who was she? He didn't look at her. "Someone who used to sing." That was all he said before walking off into the open fields, where the morning light couldn't quite chase away the shadows in his eyes. Inside the barn, June touched her throat. That melody still lingered on her lips, fragile and familiar. She didn't understand how, but something told her that song was never meant to be lost. The night was colder than most, the kind that made the boards creak and the lamps burn low. Eli couldn't sleep. Every time he shut his eyes, he heard that song, her song, drifting through the barn like a ghost that refused to rest. He'd buried Lila with silence. After she died, he'd stopped speaking altogether, convinced that words had betrayed him once and might again. But tonight, the stillness pressed too hard. The world felt heavy with things unsaid. Across the yard, a lantern flickered inside the barn. June hadn't gone to bed either. He saw her shadow move, small and restless, pacing near the stalls. Something about the sight, her alone, the wind howling outside, pushed him to his feet before he could stop himself. When he reached the barn, the door groaned open. June stood there, hair loose, face pale. Her hands trembled as she tried to calm the skittish mare. The storm outside had started again. Wind rattling the walls, rain pelting the roof. "Easy," she whispered to the horse. "You're safe. You're safe." But her voice broke, and Eli realized it wasn't the animal she was trying to comfort. He stepped closer, boots crunching over straw. June turned, startled, eyes wide and shining in the lamplight. "Didn't mean to wake you," she said quickly, though her voice quivered. "I just don't like storms." The wind thundered again, louder this time, shaking the lantern chain. June flinched and pressed a hand to her chest. "I hate the sound," she whispered. "It feels like when I had to run." She stopped, swallowing hard. "Sometimes I still hear them shouting." Eli didn't know what to say. For years, silence had been his only shield. But now, standing there with her trembling, the quiet felt like a cruelty. He moved closer, slow and careful. The horse snorted softly but didn't shy away. June looked up at him, her breath uneven, her walls crumbling in her eyes. And before he could think better of it, Eli spoke, his voice rough and broken from disuse. "It's okay." June froze, her lips parted, disbelief flashing across her face. You talked." He blinked, throat raw. The sound startled him too. "Yeah," he rasped, as if testing the word. "Guess I did." For a long moment, neither moved. The rain softened against the roof, and the barn filled with the warmth of something wordless but alive. June's tears fell silently. She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. "You said it like you meant it." He looked at her, eyes darker than the storm outside. "I did." The horse settled, the wind eased, and somewhere in the middle of that fragile calm, Eli realized how much he'd missed the sound of his own voice, especially when it was meant for someone who needed it. The storm didn't stop when morning came. It only shifted from a hard rain to a steady downpour that blurred the line between sky and land. The world outside the barn was nothing but gray. Inside, it was the soft sound of breathing and the gentle scrape of a shovel against hay. June had hardly slept. Eli's voice, that one word, "It's okay," still echoed in her mind, more comforting than the lullaby she could never quite remember. She watched him now as he moved about the stalls, quiet but no longer unreachable. There was something new in the way he carried himself, as if a door had cracked open inside him. "You didn't have to stay up," she said, her voice hushed under the rain's rhythm. He paused, leaning on the rake handle. "Didn't want you alone in the storm." June smiled faintly. "Seems you've done this before." He shook his head. "Not like this." The thunder rolled again, distant but deep, and she flinched. Eli noticed. He walked to the tack bench, took a blanket, and placed it gently around her shoulders. His hand lingered there a second too long before he pulled back. "Used to be storms scared me too," he said, "till someone taught me to listen instead of hide." "Who taught you?" she asked softly. He met her gaze. "My wife, Lila." June's breath caught. The name alone carried a weight that filled the barn. "She's the one who wrote that song, isn't she?" Eli's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "She used to sing it when the thunder came. Said if you met the noise with music, it couldn't hurt you." June looked down, voice trembling. "I don't know how I know it, but when I hum it, I feel like someone's protecting me." "Maybe she still is," he said. The rain grew louder, like applause against the tin roof. June's fingers toyed with the edge of the blanket. She drew in a breath, then began to sing. Her voice wavered at first, soft and unsure, but the melody steadied as it filled the space between them. Eli closed his eyes. The ache in his chest twisted into something else, something lighter, like the storm washing away years of silence. Without realizing it, he began to hum along. Their voices met in the middle of the barn, fragile and imperfect, but real. When the song faded, the thunder had softened to a whisper. The horses were calm again. June looked up at him, eyes bright with tears. "I guess music works," she said, smiling through the shimmer. Eli managed a quiet chuckle. "Guess it does." Outside, the first sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the wet grass. Inside, two hearts that had been hiding too long finally found something steady enough to hold on to. By the time the mud dried and the sun came back, the ranch had settled into a fragile peace. The air smelled of wet earth and wildflowers, and for a few quiet mornings it almost felt like the world had forgiven them both. June laughed again softly, rarely, but enough to make Eli notice. He'd begun to speak more, too. His voice was still rough, but each word came easier, like it had just been waiting for someone to listen. He didn't know what to call what was growing between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that filled the long, empty spaces his silence used to hold. That peace ended one afternoon. Eli was repairing a fence near the front pasture when the sound of hooves echoed down the road. He looked up and saw a lone rider cutting through the dust, a tall man in a black preacher's hat, coat flapping like a crow's wing. His horse moved slow, deliberate. The man stopped by the gate, tipping his hat in greeting. "Afternoon," he called. Eli nodded, one hand resting on the fence post. "Afternoon. Name's Reverend Cole," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a girl. Young, dark hair, travels light. Might have passed through here recently." Eli's jaw flexed. "Lots of travelers pass through." The man studied him for a long moment. Maybe. But this one's special. She's under my care. Left without a word. Folks are worried. Eli said nothing. Silence, for once, was safer than speech. Cole's gaze drifted past him toward the house, the barn, the open pasture. His voice turned softer, but his words sharpened. You'd tell me if you'd seen her, wouldn't you? Be a sin to hide what ain't yours. Eli stepped closer to the gate, the sun catching in his eyes. Don't take kindly to strangers preachin' on my land. The man smiled again, too calm. Didn't mean offense, just lookin' to bring her home. Eli's hand rested near the latch of the gate, still but ready. If she wanted to go home, she'd have gone. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The air felt heavy enough to break. Then Reverend Cole tipped his hat once more. Maybe so, he said, turning his horse. But folks like her don't stay hid for long. He rode off slow, dust curling behind him like smoke. Eli didn't move until the man disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned toward the barn. June stood there, half hidden behind the doorframe, eyes wide and face pale. He's found me, she whispered. Eli's voice came steady, low. Not while I'm here. He hasn't. For the first time since she'd arrived, June didn't look like she was ready to run. She stepped toward him, the fear in her eyes meeting the steel in his. The storm had passed, but another had just begun. The sun sank behind the hills, dragging the color out of the sky. By the time darkness settled, the ranch felt smaller, like the whole world had drawn in close to listen. Eli lit the fire in the main room, the glow painting the walls in amber light. June sat near it, blanket wrapped tight, her eyes fixed on the flames. She hadn't spoken since the stranger left. The fear in her face was quieter now, but not gone. He said his name was Reverend Cole, Eli began. You know him. June's fingers tightened around the blanket. Too well. He waited. Silence had never bothered him before, but now it felt cruel to let it linger. She drew a shaky breath. He's not a preacher. Not really. My mother followed him when I was a kid, said he was a man of God, that he could save us from the world's wickedness. But all he ever did was take. Eli's brow furrowed. Take what? Freedom, she whispered. Choice. We lived on his land, obeyed his rules, sang his hymns till our voices went raw. My mother used to tell me to sing when I was scared, said God would hear me. But I think she just wanted to keep me quiet. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. June's voice shook, but she didn't stop. When she died, he said I belonged to him, that my voice was his to command. I ran the first night I could, been running ever since. Eli stared into the fire, the crackling filling the hollow in his chest. He'd known pain, loss, but not the kind that left scars invisible to the eye. That song, he said quietly, the one you hum, your mother teach you that? June nodded slowly. She called it a prayer. I didn't know it meant anything more. He looked up, eyes dark with memory. It was written by my wife. June blinked. Lila? He nodded once. She sang it to calm storms, said it kept people safe. Maybe your mother heard it once, maybe that's how it found you. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the firelight flickering between them like a heartbeat. Funny, June said softly, how something meant to save one soul ends up saving another. Eli gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Guess the Lord's got a way of recycling miracles. June laughed, then a small, broken sound, but it carried warmth. She leaned back, letting the blanket slip from her shoulders. The fear had loosened its grip at last. Eli reached forward, tossing another log into the fire. You don't have to keep running anymore, he said. Not while you're here. June's eyes shimmered in the light. And you don't have to keep silent anymore. The crackle of the fire was their only witness, as both promises settled into the quiet night, binding two souls who'd spent too long in the dark. The next morning broke sharp and cold. The wind carried the kind of stillness that came before trouble. Eli felt it in his bones long before he heard the sound of hooves. June was feeding the chickens when the first rider appeared over the ridge. Then came another and another, 3 in total. The one in front wore the black hat, Reverend Cole. Eli stepped off the porch, jaw tight, hand brushing the side of his coat where his old revolver hung. He hadn't drawn it in years, but his body remembered how. Cole pulled his horse to a stop a few yards from the gate, dust curling at his boots. 2 men flanked him, lawmen by the look of their badges. "Mornin', Mr. Carson," Cole called out, voice smooth as oil. "Hope we're not intrudin'. I've brought the law to help me collect what's mine." Eli's voice was low, steady. "Don't recall you ownin' people out here." Cole's smile didn't falter. "You've got a runaway girl under your roof. She's been listed as a ward of the state under my guardianship. She's not fit to decide for herself. You've been harboring her." June stepped out from behind the fence, face pale but eyes clear. "He's lying. I'm not his ward. I was his prisoner." One of the deputies shifted uneasily. "Sir," he said to Cole, "you didn't mention that." Cole's charm cracked for a moment. "She's confused. Poor thing's been sick in the head since her mother passed." Eli took a step forward, voice hard now. "She's not confused, and she's not going anywhere with you." Cole's gaze darkened. "You're risking arrest for a girl who ain't yours." Eli's tone didn't waver. "You're standing on my land, which means she is." For a moment, no one moved. The wind whistled through the dry grass. Then June walked forward, slow and deliberate, until she stood beside Eli. Her hands were shaking, but her chin stayed high. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "I've got a voice now, and you can't take it from me." Cole's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're doing, girl." "Yes," she said softly, "I finally do." The deputies exchanged glances. One stepped forward, hand resting on his holster, but he didn't draw. "Reverend," he said carefully, "if she's sayin' she left of her own will, this ain't our fight." Cole glared at them both, but his confidence faltered. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Eli's hand rested on the gate latch. "Maybe, but not today." Cole spun his horse around, dust rising behind him. The deputies followed, neither looking back. When the last of the hoofbeats faded, June turned to Eli. Her breath trembled out in relief. "You stood up for me," she whispered. Eli looked at her with quiet certainty. "No," he said. "You stood up for yourself. I just made sure someone heard you." For the first time, she smiled without fear. The ranch, once silent and haunted, finally felt alive again. Spring came slowly to the Carson ranch. The frost melted from the fence rails, wildflowers pushed through the damp earth, and for the first time in years, laughter carried across the fields again. Eli stood on the porch, watching June hang laundry on the line. The morning light caught her hair, turning it to gold. She hummed while she worked softly, the same song that once haunted his memories. Now it sounded like something new, something alive. "Didn't think you'd ever make this place sound like home again," he said as he came down the steps. June smiled over her shoulder. "Didn't think I'd ever find one." They worked side by side, the rhythm of their movements easy now. There was no need to fill the quiet, it was no longer heavy. The silence, that had once been a prison for Eli, had become a comfort, softened by her presence. Later, the townsfolk gathered for the spring fair. The air buzzed with music and the smell of roasted corn. June stood behind the small wooden stage, wringing her hands. Eli watched her from the crowd, heart steady but proud. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. June took a breath. "I've spent years running from my voice. Maybe it's time I use it for something that doesn't hurt." When she stepped onto the stage, the chatter faded. She stood beneath the string lights, dress fluttering in the breeze, eyes sweeping over faces that once would have frightened her. Then she began to sing. The melody rose clear and strong, the same song that tied their lives together. "The sun may fade, but hearts remember." The crowd stilled, Children leaned forward. An old ranch hand wiped his eyes. And there, in the front row, Eli sat with his hat in his hands, smiling like a man who'd finally learned how to breathe. When the final note faded, June found him through the crowd. He didn't speak, but she didn't need him to. The look in his eyes said everything words could not. After the fair, the two walked back home under the stars. The fields glowed faintly with fireflies, and the air was warm with spring. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked quietly. Eli glanced toward the horizon. "I used to think there wasn't one. But now?" He looked at her, a soft smile breaking through the weathered lines of his face. "Now I reckon there's a whole lifetime left." June reached for his hand. "Guess that makes two of us." They reached the porch as the first evening crickets began to sing. Inside the house, the fire crackled. The floorboards creaked, and through the open window drifted the faint echo of her song, no longer haunted, no longer lost. The house, once silent, was singing again. And this time, it was theirs.